I was off shift by the time the hail came through. That's the part I always leave out when I tell it, because it makes the whole thing sound like an accident. And it was, but not the kind people think. Third Reach listening post keeps 3 technicians on the overnight board and lets the rest of us go home when the board is quiet. I stayed. I stay most nights, actually, in the overflow room down the corridor from the real console, a windowless closet, with 1 working terminal, and a viewport that only ever shows the same slice of daylit atmosphere sliding past, drinking bad coffee, and running old frequency sweeps that nobody's paid me to run since before the Post got its funding cut in half. It's not dedication, it's just that the sweeps are mine, and nobody minds if I keep them going on my own time, and once every few months, something crosses one of them that the real board would have filed under noise and forgotten. I like to think of it as tending something. Most nights, it's exactly as glamorous as that sounds, which is to say, not at all. That night, the sweep caught a burst on an index we hadn't used since before I was posted here. Old archive frequency, the kind assigned to Earth back when the old exploration compacts were still being drafted, and everybody wanted a channel nobody else would think to check. Dead air for decades. And then, at 02:47 on a Tuesday, something was sitting on it, structured, repeating, patient. I almost logged it as drift and went to bed. I've done that before, and been right to. But the repeat interval was too clean for drift, and there was a data packet riding underneath the carrier that looked like diagnostic telemetry, not distress call formatting, which meant somebody hadn't sent this to us on purpose. Somebody had sent it to an archive index 2 digits off from ours, and the 2 digits happened to belong to us. It took me 40 minutes to pull the packet apart, most of that spent convincing myself the decoding key I was using was even the right one, because nothing about the header matched anything I'd handled before. Once I had it, the picture was almost funny, if you didn't think too hard about the 2 people it belonged to. A transit hub, out past any patrol line we've ever run, one of the old Halvorn Concord relay stations that ties their inner systems together. A maintenance lift between 2 decks had jammed on a warped rail, the kind of thing that happens on infrastructure that old, and the automated hail was supposed to go to the Concord's own engineering archive, the one that keeps records on legacy hardware nobody builds anymore. Whoever coded the routing string that day fat-fingered the sector prefix. 2 digits. Their archive index and ours are 1 transposition apart, which I only know because I checked it 3 times, because I did not believe it either. I ran the transposition backward twice more after that, half hoping I'd find my own mistake somewhere in it instead of theirs. I didn't. There were 2 of them stuck in the lift. The telemetry gave me that much. 2 life sign clusters, 1 steady, 1 running hot with pain markers, a compartment reading that hadn't shifted in hours, meaning wherever they were wedged, they weren't going anywhere on their own. The burst wasn't asking anyone for a ship. It was asking whoever held the old engineering records for a repair schema, because the lift's control board had failed in a way their own techs apparently didn't have documentation for anymore. Legacy hardware, forgotten hardware, exactly the kind of thing that gets thrown out of active archives and left to rot in whoever still bothers to keep an old index running. I read the fault string 4 times before I let myself believe I recognized the family it belonged to. I sat with that for a long time before I did anything. There was no sending anybody. I want to be clear about that, because I know how the story usually goes in the retellings. A ship gets scrambled, somebody's fleet shows up out of nowhere, and everybody feels better. Third Reach doesn't have a ship. Third Reach barely has a working antenna dish since the funding cut. The nearest human vessel with any business being that far out was a survey corvette 4 months from anywhere near that transit hub, and by the time anyone with the authority to redirect it had approved the request through channels, the lift's occupants would have been dead for months. There wasn't a version of this where humanity showed up in a hull. There wasn't going to be an armada, or a frigate, or anybody arriving anywhere. What there was an archive. Our archive, the one I'd spent 3 years quietly maintaining on a budget line nobody remembered approving, full of decommissioned engineering standards from every old joint development program Earth had a hand in, before half those partnerships dissolved. Some of that hardware family, old shared lift control architecture from a defunct pre-Concord engineering consortium, was still sitting in our index, because nobody had ever told me to purge it. I ran the fault code from their telemetry against it at 4 in the morning, with my coffee gone cold, and it matched. Not close, matched. I didn't have authority to transmit anything on that index. Nobody had ever given me authority, because nobody had ever imagined a scenario where I'd need it. I sent it anyway, on the same misrouted frequency their hail had come in on, because it was the only channel I knew would reach them, and because there wasn't a form for this, and because two people were sitting in a stalled lift on hardware nobody alive was supposed to still understand, and I understood it. I sent the repair schema. I didn't send a message with it. I didn't know what to say to people who hadn't asked me for anything. 4 days later, the same archive index lit up again. This time the packet wasn't diagnostic. It was a written transmission, formatted the old way, like whoever sent it wasn't sure the receiving end could handle anything more modern. It read, more or less, the schema worked. The lift released on the second attempt. The injured crew member is stable. Then, after a pause I could feel even in the timestamp gap between lines, we did not send this request to you. We do not know your designation. Our hail was addressed to our own record keepers. We would like to understand how it reached an archive we have never contacted, staffed by someone we did not know was listening. I wrote back that I was nobody official, that the frequency belonged to an old compact neither of our governments remembered signing anymore, and that a routing string, somewhere on their end, had 2 digits that used to mean something else. I told them I kept old records, because the records were mine to keep, and that the schema had been sitting there for longer than either of us had probably been alive, waiting for a fault code that finally matched it. The reply took longer this time. When it came, it was short. It was signed with a name, Venick, Junior Comms Officer, no rank flourish, no formality, and it said only that they had checked and confirmed that no clause, treaty, or standing arrangement obligated any Earth station to answer a Concord maintenance hail, misrouted or otherwise. That as far as their command was concerned, nothing about this made procedural sense, and that they intended to keep the transmission log anyway, unfiled, the way you keep something you can't explain and don't want to lose. I never told my own command either. There's no line item for answered a stranded engineer with an archived repair file, because I happened to still be awake. I logged the frequency contact as routine drift confirmation and closed the file, and that would have been the whole of it, except that every year or so, on the anniversary of that Tuesday, the same index lights up for about 90 seconds, with nothing on it but an open carrier. No message, no request, just somebody on the other end, letting the channel sit open long enough for me to know it's them. I let it sit open back. Neither of us has ever said anything more than that. I don't think either of us needs to. People ask me sometimes what it felt like, being the one who answered a call that was never meant for us. I tell them it didn't feel like answering a call. It felt like somebody's mistake landing, by 2 transposed digits, on the one desk in the galaxy that happened to still have the right file in the right drawer. Nobody sent a fleet. Nobody needed one. The whole rescue fit inside a data packet smaller than the coffee-stained log I filed it under, and the only heroism in it was that I hadn't gotten around to deleting an old archive that nobody else thought was worth keeping. That's the part I don't leave out anymore. The 2 digits weren't the mistake that mattered. The mistake that mattered was assuming nobody was still listening.